Hello everyone. Today we are going to talk about a drama thriller film called The Woman from 2011. Enjoy your viewing. A wounded woman comes to a water source. She washes the wound on her body and hears a wolf howling. The woman goes into the cave and kills the wild beast. Meanwhile, a girl named Peggy sits by the pool and reads a magazine. A boy swims up to her and offers to swim with her, but she refuses and looks in the direction of her father. Chris is watching the party. Belle, his wife, approaches him and gives him a beer. Chris tells his wife to keep an eye on his daughter. Belle goes to her daughter and forbids her to talk to this guy. Meanwhile, another child of Chris and Belle's is watching the other boys touch the girl. They try to undress her to look at her. Brian is watching closely. When the party is over, Brian is the first to get into the car and tell his father that Peggy sometimes walks with the boy walking next to her. Apparently, the father did not like what he heard from his son. The family returns home. In the evening, Belle makes cigarettes for herself, and Chris takes one for himself. At night, he gets on his ATV and goes hunting in the forest. In the morning, he comes to the river and notices a woman. He watches her wash in the river, and then follows her to find out where she lives. In the evening, he returns home and makes all his family members follow him outside. He wants them to remove all the junk from the storm shelter. After that, he stays there all night and builds something inside. Morning comes. Chris comes to the cave and throws a net over the woman. He then drags her home. Meanwhile, Peggy is at school. During class, she feels sick and goes to the restroom. Brian also goes to this school. He enters the classroom while other students are still playing with a ball outside. He takes a comb out of his classmate's backpack and sticks a piece of gum to it. Chris brings the woman to the basement. He ties her to the walls and tries to examine her mouth, but at that moment, the woman wakes up. The feral woman spits out his wedding ring and swallows his finger. Chris screams in pain and hits her in the face. He goes into the house and washes the wound. Then Chris takes the gun and goes into the vault. He pulls the ropes even tighter so that the woman cannot move and shoots her into a wooden board. Chris tells her that he did it to get back at her for stubbing his toe and to teach her that she shouldn't behave like that. Chris returns home and says that they should all go to the basement together right now. He tells the family that he found this woman in the woods and now they will raise her together. Chris wants to make her a normal person. This is his personal experiment. He gives each member of the family a task. Peggy goes to get the first aid kit and Belle brings food for the woman. They put the plate in front of her and watch her carefully. The woman breaks the plate and growls at the people. Chris says that next time, they should use plastic utensils. He picks up a rake and pushes the porridge toward the woman. Chris says she will have to eat it after she gets hungry. After that, the family goes to dinner. In the evening, Darlin goes to the basement and turns on music for the woman. Meanwhile, Chris comes into Peggy's room and talks to her about life. He calls her a good daughter and tells her that he loves her. Later, Belle asks her husband if he is sure that this woman should be left in the basement. Chris gives a simple and short answer and just goes to bed. The next day, Chris goes to work. He is a lawyer. His secretary brings in the documents and tells him about the current tasks. Chris doesn't speak to her as rudely as he does to his wife. Meanwhile, Peggy refuses to run in physical education class. The teacher notices that the girl is behaving strangely. For the last few days, Peggy lies down on the grass and cries. Meanwhile, the woman tries to pull the fasteners off the wall, but her strength is running out. She bends down and starts eating porridge. The secretary goes back to see her boss. Chris flirts with her and compliments her. Later, he picks up his daughter from school, and they drive home together. At this time, Brian approaches the basement and opens the door a little. He looks at the woman, but the mother notices. She scolds her son and forbids him to go there. Chris arrives home and asks his son to feed the dogs. Brian comes to the barn and gives the dogs food. After that, Brian goes to the storage room and drills a hole in the door. Chris asks the boy where he was for so long, and he says he was just walking the dogs. Chris, Brian, and Belle go to the basement together. Chris orders his son to clean the floor and then throws him outside. Brian really wants to stay to watch, but his father forbids it. Chris begins to wash the woman's clothes. He uses very hot water and asks Belle to bring a second bucket of water. But Belle stands still and watches her husband touch the strange woman. Belle continues to watch the man touch the woman. Belle takes the board and approaches the man. She looks into the other woman's eyes and wants to help her, but stops at the last moment and shows the man the broken fixture in the wall. Chris thanks his wife and asks her to do one more task. He takes the woman outside and prepares a place for her to wash. He ties the woman to a barrel and begins to wash her. Peggy asks her father to stop, but he does not listen. Peggy turns off the water. Chris and Belle take the woman back to the basement. Chris makes his wife put clothes on the wild woman. In the evening, Chris brings her water and food. The woman is hungry, so she agrees to eat the food with a spoon. After the meal, he teaches her a new word. The teacher calls the home phone to talk to her students' parents. She leaves a voicemail saying that Peggy is pregnant, but a girl comes to the phone and deletes the message so that her parents don't find out. At night, Chris waits for his wife to fall asleep. He goes outside and goes to the basement. There, he begins to undress his woman. Brian follows his father and spies on what is happening. When Chris comes home, he just goes to bed and hugs his wife. Belle starts crying because she knows where her husband went. In the morning, Belle goes into her daughter's room and tells her it's time to get ready for school. But Peggy says she won't go to school because she doesn't feel well. Brian returns home. He thinks that no one is home, so he goes to the pantry, takes his tools, and goes to the basement. He finds a woman down there and starts doing terrible things. Peggy hears the screams and runs to the basement. She tells her mother everything. Chris comes home and finds out what his son has done. Belle tells her husband that their son touched a wild woman, but Chris does not scold his son. He says it's normal and there is nothing wrong with it. Belle is shocked by what she heard. She says that she doesn't want to live with him anymore, and today she and her daughters will leave. But Chris pushes her to the point where she faints. At this time, a teacher from the school comes to the house. Chris sits Belle down at the table and lets the teacher into the house. She tells Chris about Peggy's possible pregnancy, but Chris says it's a lie. It's impossible because he knows everything about his daughter's life. The teacher realizes that Chris is getting angry, and she tries to leave. But Chris stops her and says that she has no right to come to their house and lie about his daughter. He punches her in the face and asks his son to bring some ropes. Chris and Brian drag the teacher along the ground toward the barn. They tie her to the fence. Peggy tries to stop her father, but she fails. Chris approaches his daughter and tells her that she is to blame for what is happening. He calls her all kinds of bad names and pushes her. Peggy runs into the house and finds the key to the basement. She is going to free the wild woman to help her. Belle comes to her senses and also goes towards the basement to stop her daughter. Meanwhile, Chris and his crazy son lock the woman in a cage with hungry dogs. The woman tries to hide, but a terrifying creature comes out of the kennel. Brian calls this creature his sister. It attacks the woman and bites her all over her body. Soon, there is nothing left of the teacher. Meanwhile, Peggy has already freed the wild woman. She goes outside and sees Belle standing in front of her. She attacks her, and the woman loses half of her face. She then goes to the barn and attacks Brian and then Chris. The woman leaves the barn and tames the creature, which looks more like a dog. She enters the house and sees a little girl. The woman takes her by the hand and leads her inside. Peggy slowly follows them into the forest to start a new free life. This is where the movie ends. If you have watched the video so far, you should know that I am happy to have viewers like you. Thank you for watching to the end. Subscribe to the channel and follow the news. Klontsak Recapped was with you. See you soon.